I had done this movie with Kurt Russell, Mean Season, and they came out. Hal Ashby was doing a movie, 8 Million Ways to Die. Thank you. Thanks, Mom. I don't know where. Did you clean up that controlling place there? So I went into. I couldn't get into play this. There was this part that was the antagonist to Jeff Bridges in the movie. He was a coke dealer. He killed 10. Oliver Stone wrote that script, but he never worked with him.
That's why I got.
Yeah, but the script was changed, so technically we didn't make Oliver's movie. So this is an evil guy, killed like 20 girls in the movie, whatever, and Oliver's version of it. So I was trying to get him to play this coke dealer, the Spanish guy, and my agent said they won't see you. Lynn Stallmaster, God bless him, fantastic casting director and terrific man, says, "Oh, I know Andy. I've seen him in that movie. He's a great, beautiful young actor, but he's not this guy at all. You know, this guy is like Hector. The role model was Hector Macho Camacho, the boxer. That's who they were like looking for." So I kept pressing to go, get in on this thing, and finally, just by haggling Lynn, he finally said, okay, just have him come in. So I knew, like he said, that I couldn't go in as Andy and say, "Hi, how are you? Okay, I'll read now." I needed to be coming basically in character because they weren't buying me. So I went in character, and at the time I used to smoke cigarettes, and I remember waiting, and I was dressed in character, I was basically was ready to do the movie. And then took me to a room, we were about to read, and I started to light a cigarette, and Lynn said, "I'm sorry, there's no smoking here." And I looked at him and I said, "Okay, this is it. This is where it begins." And I said, "Angel doesn't give a fuck what you think." So Angel was the character, so I kind of secured myself out. And he looked at me and he went like a great, like he's a great casting director. He goes, "You mind if we go to another room?" And if I remember what I said something to him like, wherever we're going, I've already been. And wherever you've been, I don't need to go. So he said, "Okay, follow me." So I read for this. It's a long story, but I think the payoff is worth it. I read for him. Then he said, "You mind sticking around? One, you read for the producer, who was Steve Roth at the time, who was an ex-agent at CIA, I think." And he said, "Yeah." So I read for Steve Roth, and he said, "Wow, okay. Could you mind sticking around? Hal is about to get here, and we'd like you to read for Hal." And I said, "Absolutely." So then I get in there, and we get in the room. There's Hal, an associate producer, a young lady, Steve Roth again, and Stallmaster, and myself. And Lynn was playing Jeff's part, and there was one line in the scene that I directed to the part that eventually Patricia Arquette played. And I said to the young lady, "Would you read this line when it comes to it, so Lynn doesn't have to play both parts?" So she said, "Oh, sure, why not?" And it's just like, her line was like, "Oh, Angel, don't be that way, Angel." Don't like that. So we started doing, me and Lynn started haggling in the scene. It's kind of a confrontational haggling kind of thing. And then it comes to her line, and she said, "Oh, Angel, dude, don't be that way." And I turned to her and I said, "Shut the fuck," and I went after her for like 15 minutes. "Who told you to talk to me?" And I think like I was gonna slap her. She fell off the chair. And I said, don't you ever even speak when I'm in the same room with you. You understand? And I just went off after her. And this woman, her blood was draining. And then we finished the scene, and Hal went, "Oh." So then I said, "Mr. Ashby, it's a great honor to meet you. If this doesn't work out, I'd like to take a crack at the other part of Chance, which was written as the Bahamian pimp." And I said, "I know I don't look Bahamian, but I've gone there a lot, and I could play him as a kind of half-breed or like I can do the accent. I'd like to show you that part." And he said, "Okay." And he says, when would you like to come in?" And I said, "If I have one day to turn around." And he says, "Okay, I'll see you Thursday." So I went back home, and my agent said, "What happened?" I said, "Well, no, I did this thing. It felt pretty good." And he says, "Yeah, they offered you the part, but Hal said he'll see you on Thursday for the Bahamian Pimp." So here I was, already having one part, auditioning for a Bahamian Pimp, and no interest, or no business playing. I went in and played the pimp part, and I mean, it was whatever, but just because Hal wanted to see me. And that basically, the whole story, the point of it is that Hal Ashby would never say no to anything. He would always go, you'd say, "Hal, I thought that," I goes, "No, don't worry about it, let's just try one." He wouldn't even let you get out the idea, and that movie was basically all improvised, and yeah, Jeff and I improvised all our scenes, but...
Yeah, Jeff told me that he often didn't know what the hell was going on, that you were so intense.
And he would say, like, you could say, "Hal, I'd like to sing the national anthem while I'm stabbing her." Okay? And then you do it, he'd go, "That was interesting." We got that. He didn't know. He'd go, "We got that. Try something else." That was basically all we would always say. "Well, that was an interesting take. So you got that, try something else." He never would judge. That was the beauty. And it's a great lesson, really, not to judge the work while you're gathering raw material for the film. If an actor has an instinct, you have to provide, like Mr. Bogdanovich said about the accidents in the movie, that it's an amalgamation, a great movie is an amalgamation of great accidents. And the director has to provide a space for those things to manifest themselves. Because you never know on the day, something looks strange, and then you go back, it's really in the subconscious of the film, what is going on, and why actors are saying lines that are not in the script, or behavior. It's the subconscious of the film that's taking over. And then it's only when you get to the editing room, he goes, "God, I'm so glad he did that." Yeah. At the time, I thought that was so wild, and why was he crying? And then you realize, oh, that's the perfect beat, that's what the movie needed. And that's something that you only learn through, through being associated or having the blessing of working with people like Hal and stuff like that. They give you these life lessons.
Well, thank
Long
you.
story.
That was a great story. Talk about those happy accents, films you thought were going to be one thing that turned into something else for a good reason, a bad reason.
You mean just in general?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes am wrong. I mean, actors aren't always right. I think that's why a director is guiding this, this performance. But I think like one, for example, I'd finished this movie, the Bob Rafelson one, Blood and Wine, and I hadn't done a real big commercial movie, and I was real nervous. As a young person, I was always really interested in art films, even before the art films became trendy, and we had companies like Fox Searchlight and Focus, and the few that we have, because there's not that many. But it all seems to be very big or small these days, so there's no real middle ground. But I remember Blade came across. This movie Blade I did.
Yeah, the little tiny movie.
I thought it was going to be the end of my. I thought it was going to be the end of my career. I was in a real negative place. I was walking around with fangs and blue eyes. I was like, I feel like an idiot. And I was like, making the most money I've ever made. And I should be happy, but I'm miserable. Wesley Snipes kept trying to psych me out. Like, what is this? I've worked with Keitel, Nicholson, and these actors. They've always been really, nice to me and supportive and helped me, and like this guy's like looks at me like he wants to kill me, and I'm the bad guy in this movie. What's going on here? And I was like playing all these mind games, and I thought it was going to be the end of my career, and sure enough, it was like the most successful movie I'd ever been in at that time. So it was like, I never really know. I just go on my instinct of what I feel when I read something, when I meet the filmmaker, who the other actors are. It's not really as complicated as it seems. People make it a lot more complicated. If you have like one movie here with Andy Garcia and some great director where I could star with Andy Garcia, and then one movie over here that's Meatballs Part 8 for millions of dollars. I'm gonna want to do the movie with Andy Garcia and that director. Just because creatively I want to be happy.
Andy, you should go try out for the Meatballs movie.
But it's like at the end of the day, you try to go on your instincts, and actors probably, they do have a lot in their mind, but ultimately, I've passed on some movies that have gone on to be very big. You know, you can't really look back, and I'm sure Andy has many of those stories. But
I told them to shelve Ghost.
Well, here's the thing. The problem is, not the problem, but a lot of times when you're in studio movies, for better or worse, there's always a lot of people, cooks in the kitchen, and decisions are made in the editorial process of a movie through screenings or testing, to trying to reach some demographic of people, or reacting to focus group. Someone said that the blue shirt didn't look good on it, so they cut all the scenes with the blue shirt in. And movies get adjusted in that at the end, and a lot of times to the detriment of the film. They don't they don't believe in what initially the impulse to make this movie and the script the way it was gets altered by this process of many minds.
Like Jennifer 8.
Jennifer A was in my life was an indication of that. They changed the entire.
Yeah, I read the script for that movie. It was incredible. A movie that came out.
By the way, the script was shot, so
they do have that.
They snipped out. Anyway, that was one of the movies that it was changed, and I think to the detriment of the film. But in the independent cinema, for better or worse, nobody cares what you're doing, and they didn't care when you were making it. And maybe if they care once they see it, you already like the movie and it's your movie. And they might say, well, I've been in a situation where they said, we'd like to distribute the film, but we want to do some editorial changes to it. And then you have to decide there at that point where you go, do I need a distributor, or do I want my movie to be what it was intended to be? So in my case, I said, thank you very much, this movie's locked. If you like the movie, great. If you don't, then go buy another movie. But at least you're in control of that situation, and it's not part of a focus group. It's about the filmmakers, why you made the movie. The movie will exist the way you want it to exist, and you're perfectly comfortable how people react to it, but it's the movie you wanted to make, and the style you want to make. And that's the difference. The freedom of independent cinema is why I do it. This is about the creative process and the vision for a film. Let it be. It doesn't mean you might cut something out or not, but you're doing it within the nucleus of the people who decided to make the movie.
I know as a writer, sometimes if I'm reading something I've written, I will change it. Like I say, oh, I should have written that, and so that's what I read. But as an actor, it's done. It's up there. Like you can't go in and say, oh man, if I had made that other choice, it would have been so much better. So I wonder how that feels sometimes to look back at a movie and say, oh.
Well, that's in the editorial thing. The choices sometimes were made, independent of how the movie was edited, would be misinterpreted. But when you're doing a movie, me and Steve are doing a movie, and we're in the room together, and we're discussing, and he'll say to me, if I'm directing, he'll say, what about that tape where we're going, okay, let's look at it. This is why I think the other one's better, but let's look, there's a collaboration, there's not an exclusion.
Right.
But and people, sometimes editors can try to reinterpret your work.
Right.
Instead of going with your work, they try to go force a cut in there or a reaction that's not even connected to the scene because they said, oh, this is what I think the character should do this now, and you don't notice it, but in the subtext of the film, I think the audience is going to go,
Oh yeah.
It's like this. It's like a looped ADR line. When it's not married to the negative, it's not married to the negative. No matter how well, no matter how well it's looped, or ADR, it's still not part of the physical documentation that happens in the moment. And that to me loses, it just kind of disappears. And it's the same way I think editorially. If you're not really tied into the real behavior of it and the real thought process of the actor in that moment, and you're forcing them from another thing. It's off. Spiritually, it's off.
Yeah. I was once with Thelma Schoonmaker, is that how you say her name? And she was cutting something for Marty Scorsese, and she said, and I said, oh my God, that's so good. And she said, let me show you something else. And she showed me a first cut of that scene that was completely different. It had different text and subtext. People's intentions were different, and yet it was the same lines were going back and forth. It was when I first started in the business, and I had no idea that the editor had so much power. So, it's 10:45. Should we take questions? This is a very chatty audience. Is there anything that we need to? We've gone over the twin thing, and we've talked. No, you know what? Talk about Backbeat for a minute, because I love that movie, and I hadn't seen it in a long time, and it was just a pleasure to watch. And I remember that it was a big deal when it came out, you know?
Yeah, that was a long time ago. You know? But yeah, that was after I did The Power of One, and I went to. It was weird because I kept getting these roles when I was 17. I kept getting these leads, and finally got movies, but I was always playing English, which was weird. You know, I'm from LA, so.
You have a good accent in Backbeat.
Yeah, so I learned that. I think I got a good ear from my dad, and I've always had a pretty good ear for that stuff. But I remember I was going over to England to do this movie, and everybody else were Scousers. They were from Liverpool, you know. So I had great, Ian Hart, who played John Lennon, who's a fantastic actor, just took me around, and I bonded with him, tried to get that accent, which is hard because everybody mimics that accent anyway when they try to become, the Beatles became so huge. The Liverpudlian accent is very like sing-songy, and it can easily get a little hokey, if a Yankee's doing it. So I try to find that zone, and I had really great people that I worked with, and yeah, I think it was a beautiful movie because there's a beautiful underlying story there between Stuart and Astrid, who was this girl we fell in love with in Germany. And he was John Lennon's best friend, Stuart Sutcliffe, but had a passion for painting, not really being in the band, and he ended up dying at 21 of a brain hemorrhage. Took a lot of speed, and Astrid was this woman that kind of developed, she was way ahead of her time, and developed the haircuts for the Beatles and the winkle pickers and kind of the style, and took the early photographs of them. And as soon as Stu died, they then took over the world pretty much. That was the birth of the Beatles, and that was just a really special movie at a special time. It's a movie I sometimes hear it now and then, and there's a Broadway musical now of
There is a
of that story, which is a little weird. I went to see it, and it was like being in a time warp. It was like exact scenes out of the movie, and it was strange. But yeah, no, that was a great experience. I came back, and I remember I had a big meeting with like Sidney Pollack and Tom Stoppard, and I, obviously knew who Sidney Pollack was. They told me who Tom Stoppard was. I realized, what an incredible writer. And so we went and I had this meeting. I was now, I think, 19. And they thought I was English, it was weird. And I said, I'm from the Valley, man. Laurel Canyon, right? But it was weird because I kept playing English guys, because I think the Ewan McGregors and the Jude Laws and the other guys that were close to them, a little older than me, they were popping later over there. So as they popped, then I never played English again. I was like, hey, come on, guys, what's going on? But I got to play American again, or do something else closer to where I'm from. So.
Great.
I remember in Miami Beach, in the food fair there, they used to sell the Beatle wigs and the checkout counter. Put it on, it was just a mop, like
No, I don't remember that.
Martha, I have a question.
Sure. I'm supposed to ask. I'm in control here, even if it doesn't seem that way. Would you like to ask a question? Please do.
Yes, I would. I too. One is about City Island.
Yeah, you left that out.
I just love that movie, and I just wanted to hear you talk about it because I had a sense that it was your movie, but I don't know how much it was your movie in terms of writing and directing. And the second question is just advice to young actors, because I teach actors, and they always head off to LA and New York, and sometimes you might say something that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Profound.
Thank you.
Too.
The City Island was very similar to Middleton. It was Raymond DiFelita, writer-director of the film, came to me. He'd been trying to get the movie off the ground for like 5 years, and with no success. And I read the script, and I thought it was a gem. The same thing with at Middleton. They were with it for 5 years or so, and they couldn't get. And he said, I said I love the material, and he said, I would be honored if you would play the part, and if you want to produce it with me. Now that's, you say, I did a movie called The Lost City. It took me 16 years of my life to make this movie. It was nobody wanted to make this movie. Nobody gave me any money for it. And I had, Bobby Duvall attached to it. I mean, I had a good cast, so I know what producing an independent movie is. It's not like, I'm going to be a producer. It's more like, I'll be a producer. You challenge yourself. You say, okay, we just got to make this movie, and what are you prepared to do, kind of, for it? So we shook hands and we said, okay, let's go for it. But I knew, again, like at Middleton, it was going to attract great actors because of the material. So we started casting the movie, and There was a very interesting story from I gave the script to my daughters, and Dominica, who was the oldest, there was a part in there. She ended up playing the girl, it was my daughter, who was the exotic dancer. And she said, Papi, this is a great script, you gotta make this, it's a great part for you. And I said, if you don't find a name for this part of the girl, because I'm sure you're gonna need one to help finance the movie, I'd like to take a crack at it. And I said, absolutely, you should. It's a great part for you. And so we went on and we tried to cast that part with, names, to help the pre-sales and all that. And none of the girls wanted to play the part. So eventually one day she came through the door and she was like in workout clothes. And I said, hey, where you been? He said, no, I was just working out. And he goes, what are you doing? He said, pole dancing.
You did your job well.
So, yeah. And that was like 3 months before she even auditioned for the movie, and then she went to audition for Entourage, and Sheila Jaffe, who was our casting director, saw her, and and then she didn't get the part, but she called Raymond and says, I found your girl, and he said, who? He says, it's Andy's daughter, you gotta meet her right away, that's the girl. But anyway, City Island was a movie that we did, we scrapped together, did it for like 5 point something. Joe, what was it, like $5.5 million? Joe Drago, who's an associate producer of mine on both of these films. About $5.5 million, and we went into production at 8. By the time we started shooting, it was like 5. Every day, the line producer would come to me and go, "Bond company says you have to defer a little bit more of your money," and I go, "Okay, whatever." And then before you know it, everybody had deferred everything, to get the movie made. But I called Alan Arkin. In the movie, the whole Brando thing was not in the script. That was the one thing I brought to it. It was the whole through line of Brando. I don't know if people saw the movie, when you see it, you'll know what that means. And I remember calling Alan Arkin to see if he would do me a favor and play this part. And he said to me, I usually don't do these things like this, but I really want people to see you in this movie. And then he came, and he's an extraordinary guy, and probably one of the greatest actors who ever lived. And so he comes and plays this acting teacher in the movie, and we actually rewrote his speech. He wrote it himself because he wanted to include this sort of like dismantling of the Brando myth in it. And then I called him back. I had this crazy idea where I went on this audition, which was like thousands of people waiting, to audition for a Martin Scorsese movie. The lines are around the block. And I'm in line. I go to the back of the line. I got to walk around the block like 3 times to get to the back of the line. So I had this idea that I'd meet Alan in the line, who was my acting teacher. And if my acting teacher's on the line, what chances do I have to get the part? So Raymond says, yeah, but that's going to entail Alan to work a second day. So I said, well, let me call him. So I call Alan, and he says, I have this idea, Alan, but you have to stay a second day. We can do the 2 days back to back, but you'd have to stay one more day in New York. No pressure, but I'll share it with you. So I told him the idea, and I said, and when I walk around there, you'd be in line. You went, I was going to go ahead of him. What was the other question?
Advice. Do you guys have advice for young actors?
What I tell my kids, my daughters who are actresses, is preparation. You got to study the craft like there's no tomorrow. Like if you're going to be a doctor, you got to prepare yourself for it. There's going to be a lot of persistence and the audition process for me, when I kind of finally understood it a little bit, and Stephen could talk about this, but for me was when you go into the room, it's really you got to get control of that room. This is your time. It's not their time, it's your time. And you need to leave. Assume you're not going to get the part. Take that pressure off you right away. You're not going to get the part. But when you go into that room, you're going to play the part, and you have to leave that room, and people are going to go, wow, she's totally wrong for the part, but I'm going to put her in my go-to drawer. And you want to get in the go-to drawer to that casting director and to those people who saw you. So when the next movie comes up, there'll be a part that you are right for somehow, and you go, oh no, I got the person for you, this is it right here, this is the guy. And you have to have that kind of resonance in your work. If you have resonance in your work, you'll build a career. If you don't, you won't.
Carolyn? I know everybody here. Every single person in this group.
I have a question that's about the general process for independent films. In other areas in life, once you
They want you to use the mic. They're giving it to you.
Sure. Yeah, I have to speak.
Yeah, I have to speak in a softer voice for
Exactly.
everybody. Okay. Independent films the attitude that prevails in the rest of life. In other words, if you've had a success, then the next time you go out to do something, people remember, oh, he did well last time, so I'm going to assume that there's a greater chance he's going to do well this time, so I'll support it. I get the feeling that that approach does not apply to independent films. That if you make an independent film with an excellent cast and a good script and it goes well, that the next time you want to make an independent film, you're still starting at square one, which I've always found to be fascinating, and I wondered if you could speak to the why of that.
Can I just do something I fucked up? Stephen, do you have anything to say to Lee's first question about, do you have any advice for actors in the...
Yeah, that was a really good question.
I know, but we're going to get to that.
I mean, yeah, the same. I mean, same as Andy. You know, I mean, I think the business has changed so much even since I've, been doing. I mean, I'm sure it's just changed because it used to be there were different groups. There were the young guys I always used to go up against. It was the same 5, 6 guys. Now the world with the internet and with the TV becoming so hip and cable TV and all these different venues of entertainment, it's kind of one huge world. You've got singers taking leads in movies, you got guys coming out of nowhere taking leads in movies, you've got, the competition factor I think is a lot, harder these days because there's also fewer and fewer movies. But I guess as a young actor I would just say, yeah, be prepared, get tough skin and make sure it's something that you really want to do, not just for the fame and the stuff that is nice, the perks, but that's not really what it is to be an actor. To be an actor is the most fun, I think, is when you're grooving and in sync with a team and with another partner, your acting partner, and the learning experience. And I learned, my acting school was working with the best actors in the business. And so rather than be in a classroom, which I didn't have that experience, I didn't get I didn't learn from Stella Adler or from all these incredible teachers that have been out there that taught all these artists that are now teaching me. I basically learned on the ground. And but I would just say be ready and be ready to work. And some people get lucky and it happens right away, bang. Some people it could be years that you're fighting, and then you finally get that one gem, and then it works for them. So it's all everybody's path seems different, but. Yeah, just be prepared and make sure it's something you want to do, and then go for it, full steam.
Okay, now we're going to fast forward to Carol Lee's question, which is, I think, if you're in a big studio movie, the studios, and it does well, the studios will bank on you. But if you're in a successful independent movie, you go back to square one, and maybe they'll finance your movie, and maybe they won't.
Well, the business has changed. The foreign distributors in the old days, when I say the old days, when I started in the 70s and 80s, whatever, you could just have a poster, with 2 people on it and a title, and not even have a script and get money financed through foreign pre-sales. If you had people who are recognizable in the film, Now they want to read the script, they'll lowball you an offer. They'll say, we like it, but we'll want to see the movie first before we buy it for our territory. So yes, you're starting from scratch, and if your movie is not something that technically will travel well within all the foreign markets, which is you're trying to get at least half of your budget out of the foreign,